This story begins deep in the night. The girl sat next to the crates, almost unconscious. The girl was insanely hungry. She looked at her hand and thought she still didn't know what it was there. That day, a crowd of slum children were beaten to death. This girl was immediately beaten with her hair, kicking and kicking and kicking and kicking with her hands, with everything she could get her hands on, while harping on how dare she steal everyone's bread. At that moment, the girl thought, if this is how she will meet her death, she felt her eyes begin to darken. And just like that, on death's doorstep, memories of a past life came back to her, and the last of them was a plane crash. Then suddenly the girl saw some pretty girl in front of her. She thought maybe it was her. But at that moment the stranger began to go somewhere. The girl shouted in her wake to wait. But when I looked at my hands, it really surprised me because they were childish. But then suddenly a lot of books started falling down beside her. She didn't realize why it was all happening. Then suddenly she could read one of the titles, The End of Eternal Flame. At that moment, she heard someone's voice saying that inside this novel was the world she had read about before she died. Then she looked up and saw some silhouette of a man who had opened this book, and he said that she was now arranged to live a new life. And within a second she was holding that book in her hands and was in a completely different guise. A child not unlike her former self. Just like that, her soul had leaked onto the page of the great book. And that was why the girl was in that place now. But she didn't understand what it was all for. She wondered if she had gotten the role of the poor beggar. And if you think about her appearance, this body had a backstory too, right? The man let her live with him, even though she wasn't even his own. But he wasn't so kind. The man asked for the girl to be out of his sight and kept calling her a vile, filthy brat. That's how she got kicked out. But at this point, the girl's memories are cut short, and she is completely unaware of the plot of the book. The girl hopes that everything will work out, and also that the novel has a good ending. But at that moment, she smelled a pleasant aroma. When she looked over, she saw that there was a whole basket of bread on the table nearby. She was glad when she saw it. Looking at him, the girl thought that she had made a mistake last time. But this day, no one would be able to deprive her of the big breads. So she would have to wait for the right moment. At that moment, the man who was standing next to that table was called by someone, and he started to walk away. Once the girl thought that this was the right moment, she stealthily snuck under the table and grabbed one of the loaves. The girl thought she was so lucky, and it was the easiest thing in the world. When she was about to leave, she decided that she would not share it with anyone and would eat it all herself. But that's when the girl was caught. The man, lifting her up, said it was that beggar girl again. The girl, realizing that her plan didn't work, made a pitiful look, and she apologized to him. But it didn't work, and he just threw her on the pavement, saying, "Does she think that's cute?" The girl was once again overtaken by failure. She didn't understand why her life was in this book. It's hell. Suddenly, she was interrupted by a voice. A woman reached out to help her and asked if she was all right. The girl, seeing her, did not understand what was happening, but noticed that the stranger was very beautiful. The girl looked at the baby and said that this child had the same pink hair and blue eyes. And then she asked, "Are these common traits?" The girl looked at this woman and thought that she was just an incredible beauty, as if she were the heroine of a novel. The woman asked the little girl how old she was. At that moment, the girl thought that she, too, had noticed pink hair in her memories, and replied that she was already 8. She asked, "Is it true?" and if the girl wanted to go with her. The little girl was frightened and just sat there looking at the stranger, and herself at that moment thought, whether it is a slave trade. But the girl, seeing the frightened look of the girl, said that she was not a bad person. Then she said her name was Violetta Fitz, and she was Countess Fitz. The girl hesitated and began to scrutinize the stranger. She noticed the brown hair and the green eyes. She thought maybe this way she could remember what the novel was about and learn her destiny. The girl fell to the ground and said that she wanted bread. She was very hungry and couldn't do anything anymore. Violetta, when she heard this, said that their house was full of delicious food, and in addition to bread, for example, they had meat and freshly baked cookies. But the girl said nothing. Then Violetta said that if she didn't want to go, she would have to eat it all by herself. The girl immediately jumped up and shouted that she would go. She looked at Violetta and thought there was no way such a beautiful girl could be a slave trader. It was obvious. The girl held out her hand to the little girl, and the girl thought at that moment that she was no longer a wandering beggar. After a while, riding in the wagon, they were already beginning to approach the estate, and the girl thought that her new life would now be a path that would be strewn with beautiful flowers. When they arrived, the girl was greeted by the maid, and rolling up her sleeves asked if it might be worth a swim. The girl was very frightened when she saw this, and the maid began to examine the little girl and saw various bruises and beatings on her. Then she whispered to her partner to quickly inform mistress and call a healer. The girl, who was looking around casually, blurted out, "Wow," and thought it was just a huge and luxurious bathroom that she had never seen before in her life. There was an insane amount of foam inside. Then the maid asked if she wanted to play with the bubbles while she bathed. The girl was shocked, but the maid said that the bath was not ready yet, so it was okay to have fun. The little girl was immediately happy about it, and she thought that she had been wrong to judge them by their appearance, for these people turned out not to be scary at all. Then she took a bath and changed her clothes. The girl was taken to a room and given a drink, drinking a whole glass. She thought that there were such good people. She used to live in a place where both the master and the servants had nasty characters. The girl thought that the same house must have a kind master. It was obvious to her that there was no slave trade in this place. The girl got up from the couch and examined herself from head to toe, thinking that this was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. It was her first time wearing such a gorgeous outfit, at which point the girl began to spin around and giggle happily. But then suddenly the maids came in and, seeing this picture, began to smile. The little girl was frightened and wondered what she was doing. Now her pride has been shattered, but it's all because of her childish body. She doesn't want to be helpless again. But then suddenly the maid asked the little girl if it was time for them to eat now. The cook had already prepared delicious dishes. The girl began to imagine the different delicious things that could be, and got very excited about it. So she ran up to the maid, put her arm around her, and told her that yes, she was very hungry. Afterward thought all these childish behaviors are just a scary thing that drives her. After that they all went to the banquet hall. When the girl ate, she couldn't stop eating. She thought it was all so delicious. The maid approached the mistress and wanted to say something, but Violetta stopped her and replied that let the girl eat as much as she wanted, but let them prepare a digestive aid beforehand. Violetta thought about it and said that after the bath she resembled this man even more, and asked if it was possible to be so similar while being complete strangers to each other. The maid asked if she meant Mr. Adrian. Violetta agreed and asked if the butler was of the same opinion. The maid was about to object to something, but Violetta replied that she knew and thought that the youngest child had died immediately after birth, and that was certain. However, no matter how much the girl thinks about it, she still feels like she's managed to find Adrian's little sister. Then Violetta asked if she hadn't asked for a kinship check at the temple. Some time ago, the maid said that all was correct. The rumored illegitimate child was kicked out at Viscount Barrel's request. The maid added that the child's mother apparently just pitied the money and wished for money. Violetta asked if Viscount Barrel was correct. The maid said it was correct. Then she wondered if his eyes weren't light blue, and asked if it was strange, but the maid did not understand and asked what she was talking about. Violetta replied that Adriana's sister was not dead. The girl speculated, what if 6 years ago, around the same time, Viscount Barrel had an illegitimate child? They don't know if it could have been switched, and they have no information if the deceased child had pink hair and blue eyes. Violetta, thinking, said they would inquire of the woman who had borne the child to Viscount Barrel. The maid replied that they did, and she added that the Earl and his wife reported that they were almost finished dealing with matters at the estate and would be returning to the mansion sometime next week. Violetta answered well, and thought she needed to look into this case thoroughly, because she knew how hard it had been for Adrian's family. The maid took the girl in her arms and said she was full to the brim and immediately fell into slumber. Violetta walked over to the girl and plucked one hair from her, thinking that tomorrow she would take Adrian's hair and address the temple. When the next morning came, the girl slowly began to wake up. When she opened her eyes, she didn't immediately realize where she was. Sitting up on the bed, she saw Violetta beside her, who asked in a sleepy voice if she was awake yet. Then she wished her good morning. At that moment, the girl remembered that yesterday she had eaten at the girl's house. At that moment, the girl with a very frightened face asked, Didn't she become a slave? Violetta was silent for a while, and then laughed sharply, saying that it was illegal to be a slave. Afterward, she hugged the girl and told her not to worry because Violetta had never even thought of such a thing. Then she wondered if the girl had decided to humor her early in the morning, but all the little girl could think about was Violetta hugging her. Then the girl asked if they could go back quietly. Today they would be visiting the home of a close friend of Adrian Eston's. The girl started nodding approvingly, and then she thought about it and realized that she kind of knew him. She thought that it seemed to be the same name, Adrian Aston, that the hero in the novel had. But that book had a bad ending. At that moment, the girl thought. Her hair was pink and she lived in a slum. The girl could not believe that she was really in this novel, and began to cry hard. After that, they went to breakfast. The little girl, when she saw so much food in front of her, there was even meat, thought that if she did something wrong, she would be beaten again. In that case. But at that moment, Violetta came up to her and told her not to worry because all the food was just for her. At that moment, the little girl thought, is she really seeing an angel in front of her? And yet the meeting with this girl could not be just a dream. Just when she thought it was right, her new life was no longer hell, but a flowery meat field. But then suddenly, when Violetta was about to bring the spoonful of meat to the girl's mouth, someone hit her on the arm, and the meat flew off to the side. Then the girl was very upset about the meat falling on the floor, but she looked at the guy who asked if that was all she was worried about, because pretty soon she was almost gone. The doom of... At that second, the little girl opened her eyes in horror. She began to breathe heavily, but then she realized that it was only a dream. She thought it was a good thing that girl was real. But anyway, it's nighttime. Because of the child's body, all she does is sleep all day long. But it still bothered the little girl. There was sleep. Then she wondered. In fact, was she definitely in a novel? Maybe it was just her illusion? But then she accidentally touched the teddy bear with her hand. When she looked at it, she realized that for some reason, it looked very familiar. But at that moment, the girl noticed that the bear cub moved his eyes. She was very surprised and thought, did he really move? Then suddenly the bear sat on the bed and said that he was very glad to see her in his dream. She held her in her arms and the seal was broken. The girl could not believe that a talking teddy bear was sitting in front of her. But then she thought about it and realized that in this novel, the heroine's magic powers were breaking the seals. The girl thought that she had definitely seen him somewhere before and could not believe that it was really the same bear. When she turned to look at him, the bear waved at her again. The girl laughed nervously. She said it just couldn't be, it was impossible, but the bear asked why it couldn't be. He's a spirit with special powers, and this room. But he didn't have time to say anything, because the girl took it in her hands and threw it on the floor. And then she started running away, shouting that it wasn't her. But as she was about to descend the stairs, Violetta came out to meet her, and she asked what was the matter. The little girl, seeing the girl, immediately ran with tears in her eyes and hugged her. Violetta asked her about the nightmare. The girl at that moment thought that it absolutely could not be. The girl just hugged her, stroked her head, and told her not to worry. Everything's gonna be okay. At that moment with the baby, I thought it felt so good. Her hands felt like magic. Violetta picked her up at that moment and carried her back to the room. When she put the girl in the crib, the baby was already asleep. Violetta said that she was crying so hard and was completely different from other babies. The girl kept looking at the little sleeping girl and thought she was so cute, and Adrian Aston looked insanely like her. But then suddenly a butler came into the room and addressed the lady. He had a piece of paper in his hand. He handed her an envelope and told her that the results for the biological parentage test were ready. Violetta immediately opened the letter and after reading it, saw that there was a 99.9% chance of blood relationship. The next morning they arrived at the mansion. The owner of this huge castle is Duke Eston. This duke is one of the richest families in the Ferdin Empire. The little girl, as she sat on the couch, didn't understand why she was even in this place. But seeing the girl's frightened face, Violetta turned to her and told her that she had nothing to be afraid of. She asked if she could hug Mishka, whom she had taken with her. The girl looked at the bear cub and thought that maybe he wasn't in that novel. Violetta looked at them and said that they had slept very well together last night. She asked if she liked Mishka so much. The girl replied that yes, she liked it. She thought that Violetta had no idea what was going on inside her right now. And she herself reflected that if this was really the affair she was thinking of, There was no way Violetta could have given her the bear. But then suddenly the girl said that this bear was her present, a gift from her before she went home. The girl thought that in that novel, the main character never gave anyone a teddy bear. But at that moment a butler came in and told them that the Duke and Duchess Aston had arrived. And then two restless young men came running into the room. The man immediately turned to Violetta and asked if it was true. The girl, who had bright pink hair, looked at the baby girl and asked if this baby was really, but she was nervous and had no time to finish, and Violetta replied to those who entered that they might now be quite confused. But all their guesses turned out to be absolutely correct. At that moment, the girl stroked the little girl's head. She then handed the young men envelopes and said that according to the testimony from the temple, it was a girl, and Adrian had a blood relation. The little girl sat there and just watched, because she didn't understand what it was about. The man took the letter and read it. Then the woman answered that it was really true. Hearing this, she thought, do they really mean to say now that she was the Duke's daughter? The man started to approach Violetta and said that they had no reason not to believe her, but they would still do a double check. The girl said of course, as they please. But at that moment the girl shouted that there was some mistake. But then suddenly, the girl with the bright pink hair fell down, and the maids immediately ran to grab her, as did her husband. The little girl thought they were just 5 minutes away from chaos. Two little girls ran up to the woman and told someone to get a healer immediately. The little girl thought she couldn't interfere, but then, suddenly some other guy came into the room, and the moment she saw his face, she could no longer deny reality. It was the end of the eternal flame. Assistant protagonist Adrian Aston. It was the reality of an affair with a crazy, bloody ending. The novel that the girl read in her past life is called The End of Eternal Flame. The main character of this story is Violetta Fitz. The main character, however, was the crown prince of the empire, Zircon Ferdin, and the girl Adrian Aston, who appears before her eyes, will become the prince's aide-de-camp in the future. Even as children, Violetta and Zircon promised each other to get married. Because of his unrequited love for the protagonist, Arkan commits suicide without ever finding out what she was really hiding behind the marriage. In the end, in the finale, the characters die. The title of the novel implies that the moment the flames go out, we are all gone. A bloody end. The little girl knew from the beginning that this story had a horrible ending. She really wants everything to work itself out somehow. The girl came up to Violetta and stood behind her, trembling. Then the girl asked what had happened. Usually people are happy when they see a loved one in front of their eyes, but right now Adrian looked like a lost child when he looked at the girl. The girl thought he was like a little angel. After that, she fell on the floor and started crying. She didn't understand why. So why can't this novel have a happy ending? After all that had happened, the maids served tea, and everyone sat down at the table. The man who had recently arrived looked at Violetta, who was holding a baby girl in her arms. Violetta, seeing the look in his eyes, said that the girl was just a little afraid of strangers for the time being. And the girl herself thought that she would never get off Violetta's back. Everyone present was watching intently, studying the little girl, and for her it was the most horrifying thing of all. The girl thought they would drill a hole in the back of her head at this rate. She had so much on her mind about everything that she was already getting hungry. It wasn't like a field of flowers at all. She didn't understand how it was possible to torture a man with empty hopes like this. The little girl did not know what she should do. She looked at Violetta, who sat smiling happily, and thought that when she smiled like that, her heart ached even more. A butler entered the room and addressed His Excellency, saying that representatives of the temple had arrived. The man, along with his wife, came out to them and said that they were very happy to welcome him. The man said that, as he could see for himself, the percentage of blood relationship was 99.9%, which means almost 100. The wife was shocked. She asked, "Does it really mean that this child is really theirs?" The temple official said that if they have any requests, they can come forward at any time. And he thought to himself that this hurts from donated so much money to the needs of the church that they can't just leave it. At that moment, Violetta came out to them, holding the girl in her arms. The girl did not understand what she was doing. Violet turned to the temple representative and asked if he remembered her, when she looked at the girl and said that in truth, the little girl had been injured not long ago, and she had asked for her to be treated. However, some abrasions still haven't gone away and will take too long to heal. Violetta said that since he was already here anyway, could she ask to examine the girl again? The temple representatives looked a little embarrassed. He was about to say something to leave, but the Duke interrupted him and asked, "Is the girl hurt?" He and his wife immediately ran to Violetta. She could have been hurt so badly, tears of terror welled up in their eyes. Violet said that the treatment, if he did, they would be very grateful for his help. When the Duke told the temple representatives to be kind and examine her wounds, at that moment, he pointed his hand at the girl's wounds, and a bright light appeared. The little girl, when she looked at it, was surprised and thought, "Is this really healing? The wounds disappear as if by magic." The little girl thought it was a pleasant enough sensation, only she was starting to feel a little woozy now. She closed her eyes and rested her head on Violetta's shoulder. After that, the girl was carried to bed. The children stood and looked at her, whispering. One of them asked, "Is this really a real sister?" The other replied that the youngest child had been dead for a long time. The brother said that she survived and came back, almost like a zombie. It was Lois and Luca. Adrian came up to them and told them to be quiet or they would wake the baby. The boys nodded. Then the brothers said they had better go and play outside. Then he stayed alone in the room and looked at the little girl who was sleeping peacefully in the bed. At this time, Violetta was sitting with the Duke and Duchess. They asked Violetta to tell them in detail what had happened. The girl said that of course she would tell everything. After that, she began her story. Then suddenly the Duke interrupted her in the middle and said that it turns out that this child was surviving on her own in the pipes. The Duchess said it was a very poor girl. Now she remembered that servant girl named Rosalia. That woman had given their child to Viscount Beryl for money. But the Duke interrupted her and told her not to say another word. Then he thanked Violetta and said that she had saved them because they had finally met their daughter again. Then Violetta asked what they had named her at birth, because Viscount Beryl had never addressed the girl by name. When the Duchess said that they had named her Rafina, because Viscount Beryl never addressed the girl by name, when the Duchess said they called her Rafina. Violetta came to the girl and looked at her and thought Rafina was such a beautiful name. After a while, the girl did wake up. She was perturbed and puzzled. Rafina did not know what to do. But then suddenly Mishka came up to her and asked her why she was so anxious and whether she wanted to listen to a story. Rafina thought that this bear was just useless. She didn't know what she should do. The girl hesitated for a moment. She really wants this nightmarish future not to happen in the end. But then suddenly Rafina had a thought. What if she really did change the story? In the original, Violetta never gave the plush toy to anyone, and the girl is sure of it. But now she gave it to Rafina. The girl thought about it and realized that it turns out that the culprit of the bad end himself can prevent a series of monstrous deaths. If Zircon stayed alive, the kingdom wouldn't fall either. Rafina wondered what it would take for her to change the plot. The girl decided what she needed first. But then suddenly she was interrupted by Mishka's voice. He asked her to look at him. He is, after all, the spirit of infinite wisdom. If she was worried about something, she could just tell him. But Rafina looked at him like that. And then Mishka asked what was wrong with her face. But the girl said it's a lie, that's a lie. Mishka interjected that she was now even saying such a thing. He has no intelligence, and the girl remembers it well. The girl remembers this well. Even though now she is facing a small teddy bear in its true form, it becomes a huge, terrifying, wild bear, for which it is worth nothing to tear a man to pieces. His only flaw is stupidity, but then suddenly Mishka said that she just underestimates him. He is the very majority of all mysteries under his control. He also knows that Rafina is trying to change the future. He said she just told him everything and he wants to help her and make it better. Rafina thought it was right, although he is stupid in the original. However, he has amazing powers. The girl thought that there is no bad without good, so she decided to tell him everything she knew about the history of the world. After listening to her carefully, Mishka said that it was an artificially created world. It turns out there was a possibility that she was a character in some story. Rafina didn't understand what he was even talking about, and told him to tell her better if it was even possible to change the future. Mishka said that of course it was possible. The girl immediately got excited and asked how to do it. Bear said that in the original, Zircon and Violetta bond in marriage, causing Adrian, who was heartbroken, to die. He said the solution was obvious. Just make Zircon marry someone else right now. Rafina thought that the thought had never even occurred to her. But she said Zirkin was too young for that. But Mishka said, then let him get engaged to someone now, and have the wedding when he's older. Rafina got angry and asked him who he should get engaged to. Mishka came closer to her and asked her if she was the one who wanted to change the future. Wasn't it up to her? The main character Zirkin, whose mother died of a terminal illness and Adrian abandoned him. Consumed by grief, he clung to Violetta, the main character of the novel, which eventually caused her death. Rafina wondered if Zirkin would be so obsessed with her too. But Mishka said not to worry so much. Didn't he get weird because his mother died? You just have to keep her from dying. Rafina asked how she could cure an incurable disease. Mishka laughed and said she could do it if she found the legendary jewel. And he knew where to find it, by the way. He said she could cure absolutely any disease, but the girl had already thrown that out of her hands, and wondered if it was really true, she might be able to stop all this craziness that might soon start. Beautiful and kind Violetta. Zirkin will become obsessed with her. But if he's prevented, the girl thought that in that case her angel would get the happy ending she deserved. Rafina thought she had to make sure she did something to spare this story from a bad ending, and she would be sure to create a world where everyone stayed alive. She needs to break the engagement of Zirkin and Violetta and create a new alliance. Then Violetta and her older brother should get married. Rafina thought she would make everyone happy, and then she's going to take her share and go her own way. The girl thought that was just the perfect plan. Mishka, hearing all this, said that it was just a marvelous plan. Then the girl took him in her arms and asked him what his name was. Mishka was surprised and wondered if she had just now decided to inquire, but then replied that his name was Alexander Rubius Ferdinand Villoni. But Rafina interrupted him and said that she would just call him Mishka. He got angry and asked how dare she, who could give such a childish nickname, but Rafina replied not to take offense. She couldn't remember his name anyway. But then suddenly she heard someone approaching her room. She didn't know who it was, so she decided to pretend she was asleep. Duke and Duchess Aston came into the room, as well as Adrian. Mishka told her it was all through telepathic powers. Rafina said it was too noisy and let him spare her such horrible thoughts. At this point, the Duke leaned over in the crib to the girl, stroking her head, and told her that she was very poor and how hard this life had been for her. He then added that it was all his fault, but Violetta told him not to say it. Well, that's not true. The important thing is that she's back with them. Rafina is a very strong child. She will quickly get used to everything, so there is no need to worry. The girl felt the Duke's hand on her head, and thought that it was so big and warm. The Duke, after listening to all this, said that she had said all right and thanked her for it. But then suddenly Adrian came into the room and called out to Violetta. Rafina heard the voice and immediately recognized who it was. The girl thought he was such a beautiful angel and so sweet. Their life should be a field of flowers, where they would run together, holding hands and supporting each other. Suddenly Violetta said that since everything had calmed down, she would go. Rafina, hearing this, was very surprised. She wondered if the girl would leave her alone in this place. Adrian told her to wait because he was escorting her carriage, and the coachman was ready. Rafina couldn't stand it any longer, so she jumped up from the crib and shouted for Violetta not to leave. The Duke, when he saw the girl stand up, wanted to stop her, but she slapped his arm to stop him from touching her. Then Rafina kept shouting for Violetta not to go and leave her. At that moment she ran out of her crib and ran up to the girl and hugged her. She was crying hard, and Rafina thought she was definitely crazy. How could she burst into tears like a little child? She looked around and noticed that everyone was distraught. Those present didn't know how to react to this, and the girl thought she was so embarrassed and needed to pull herself together and stop crying. Rafina could not control herself at all in this childish body. She burst into tears and thought that she had definitely lost her mind. After her nap, it was time for lunch. Everyone present watched the girl. Rafina was happy that there was so much food on the table and everything belonged to her alone. The food was delicious. She had never tasted anything like it before. The girl was already a beggar who ate stale bread. At that moment Violetta was picking salads for the girl and told her to try this one too. Give her another piece of meat. She told Rafina to take her time. She enjoyed the food and also moved to the Wolokana in order not to choke. The girl, looking at Violetta, thought that she was really just an angel. Her food used to be more like dog chowder and she liked it a lot. Now she could eat as much as she wanted. The Duchess wiped Rhea's mouth with a napkin and told her husband that the girl had been starving for so long. Tears welled up in her eyes at the sight of her eating greedily, as if she had never eaten anything in her life. The Duke didn't say anything. He was thinking. The man then turned to the butler and told him to find out how Rafina was living at Viscount Barrel's house. A nice and warm bath awaited the girl after lunch. Violetta helped her in this and even entertained her. The girl made a little cat out of foam and showed it to the girl. Rafina was very surprised when she saw it and thought she was so talented. The girl suggested that maybe it was because Violetta was the main character. Even going to the bathroom with her was a lot of fun. When they had finished bathing, Violetta wiped the girl's head. At that moment, Rafina thought it was so nice. But then, suddenly, the girl turned to her and told her to listen to her carefully, because now she would live in this house together with everyone else. All these people are her family now. Rafina was surprised to hear that word. She just stood there looking at Violetta. In her previous life, every day was hell for Rafina. She was constantly threatened and told to bring money all the time. She ran away from her family for that very reason and ended up dying in a plane crash. Nothing had changed in her new life, and those people had brought her only misery. So Rafina decided that she could never have a loving family again, and didn't even hope to have one someday. When the girl was asleep, Adrian said hello to her and told her that he was her big brother. Afterwards, he thanked her for coming back. Rafina's family members now treated her with the utmost tenderness, and she didn't know if she could afford to just enjoy this happiness. When evening came, Rafina went to bed with the Duchess. She couldn't sleep for a long time because she was thinking about a plan and decided that first she had to prevent Adrian's death. But then suddenly the girl thought about her mom in her past life. Her mom had died very young, and she hardly remembered her. She was pleased to realize how warm a mother's embrace felt. She had never thought she would ever have a real family and be able to call someone mom. Suddenly, Mishka said that if Rafina called the Duchess mommy, she would be very happy. The girl asked if Mishka was still awake, but the bear got angry and told her not to call him that because his name was Alexander, and after that he told them to go to bed. At that moment, Rafina moved closer to her mother and thought that she certainly didn't want this happiness to end. She doesn't see anything wrong with being a little greedy, because she's sure to turn a sad ending into a happy one. A week later, the Duchess was no longer crying. Every time she saw Rafina, as well as the girl herself, they only rejoiced. Duke Aston, on the other hand, was in a different situation when he walked into the room and asked for the girl to give her daddy a hug. Rafina was very frightened. She ran back to the Duchess and said no, she was staying with her. Of course, the man was very upset because his daughter didn't want to be with him. But when the Duchess asked if everything was all right, she said it was. Then she asked if he could leave. The Duke never once hugged Rafina. The girl, as she sat in Violetta's arms, thought that as long as she was with her, everything would be just fine. But at that moment, Rafina remembered a passage from her past when the Vicomte Bring the girl had said all along that he had welcomed her into his home because he considered her a daughter and kept trying to hurt her physically, and Rafina can't stop thinking about it. The Vicomte kept telling her to stop acting like a child, but the girl was very scared, so she couldn't help herself. Adrian suddenly came up to Rafina with a lollipop in his hand and asked her if she wanted a snack. The girl was very scared because she didn't expect that. But when she saw the food, she got very excited and started pushing herself out of Violetta's arms, thinking that she should go quickly. Then the girl said that Adrian and Violetta should also eat with her. They agreed and said they could go to the garden. At this time, the Duke was in his study. He looked out the window and thought that Rafina must be too afraid of grown men. He couldn't believe that something very bad could have been done to her before arriving at the manor. But then he decided he needed to calm down and think straight. He doesn't know what this fragile little girl has been through. All her arms and legs are so thin and bruised. He thought that he would have Beryl cooked for everything. He made his daughter suffer, so the Duke would just destroy him. After a while, Adrian, Violetta, and Rafina came to the garden. There was a table with tea and desserts in the gazebo. Violetta was feeding Adrian a macaroon. At that moment, the girl thought she was watching what looked like a scene from a romantic movie. They fit together so perfectly. Mishka agreed with her, saying that she was absolutely right. But the main problem was Zerkin. Rafina agreed with him and reflected. The birth of the king's second son was a threat to Zerkin, who was taking his place as heir to the throne. He was also pressured by the relatives of the crown who were on the royal council. For Zerkin himself, Marriage was the best way to stay in power. He never trusted people and only allowed an exception for a loved one. And that person was Violetta. There was no love between them. The purpose of the marriage was only to keep the throne. And all of this eventually led to Violetta realizing her true feelings. Only after Adrian's death. Rafina asked, "Well, what kind of terrible fate is this? And what is all this for Violetta?" Mishka tried to calm her down and told her that if she got engaged as soon as possible, they wouldn't need to get married either. Rafina agreed with him but said that no one took it seriously. The child's words about the engagement, but Mishka said that she was still a child too. Rafina was angry. And Mishka said that it was necessary to get a promise from Zirkin to take her as his wife, and when the question of marriage came up, he would think of her at once. Mishka said that such a system is called an oral contract. Rafina thought for a moment, and then said that Mishka wasn't so stupid after all. Mishka asked, did she really think he was only outwardly gorgeous? Then he said proudly, so he did manage to hide his most outstanding virtues after all. But then suddenly the girl was interrupted from her musings. It was Adrian. He broke off a piece of cake for her, and said that she had said, "Ah." Rafina, when she saw this, couldn't believe her eyes that Adrian was going to spoon-feed her now, but thought she would eat whatever he gave her and opened her mouth. But then suddenly, when the girl was about to take a bite, Lois and Luca came up to them. Lois asked, didn't she open her mouth too wide for such a small piece? Luca turned to Adrian and asked his brother to feed him too. Rafina, seeing the twins, thought to leave because they weren't supposed to have that, and she moved closer to Adrian, hugging him. But Lois told his brother to feed him first. When Adrian said to take him calmly and asked Rafina what she wanted to eat first, the girl first thought she really wanted cake, then said she wanted to eat the whole thing. And she ended up eating the whole thing. The Duchess, who was sitting next to them watching the girl, thought her beautiful girl, and it took so long to pass. But now she only wants her days to be filled with happy moments. She has never known grief again. But as it began to get dark, the Duke and Duchess went outside to see Violet off. The Duchess said she could stay a little longer, but Violetta said no, she already owed them. Besides, they needed to spend time with their families. The girl said it was best for Rafina to have a loving family by her side. Then the Duchess took Violetta's hand, thanking her how to repay them for her kindness. But suddenly their sweet conversation was interrupted by a scream. Rafina ran out to the Duke and Duchess and shouted, "No!" Then she hugged Violetta. The girl thought it was too soon for me to leave without Violetta. She'll be too anxious. She doesn't want to be alone. But the girl hugged Rafina and said that she really needed to go back home since her parents were already back at the mansion. Then the Duchess whispered to the girl that she was making Violetta uncomfortable, but Rafina hugged the girl even tighter and waved her head. When Violetta asked what else, a little difficult on her own, but said there was nothing more to be afraid of, because now she has a real and loving family that will be there for her. After thinking about it, Rafina let Violetta go and said that she should definitely come tomorrow then. She smiled as she looked at the girl and told her not to worry because she would definitely come. Waving goodbye to Violetta, Rafina thought that it turned out that the word family alone could bring so much warmth. It was an amazing feeling. Now that left Adrian, her brother, who was standing next to her. Then she looked at him and took his hand. After that, asked if there was something she could tell him. The boy leaned over so that Rafina could tell him what she wanted to tell him. Then the girl said in his ear for him to see her off and hurry, for Violetta must not go away alone. Rafina thought that he should be with her every minute, no, every second, and not take a step away from her. The sooner they realize what they like about each other, the sooner things will get better. That's why they have to get closer as soon as possible. That's why Rafina asked Violetta to come the next day. Adrian, hearing what his sister had said, replied to his parents that he would go see Violetta off and return. In the evening, her mother came to Rafina and told her to stay together this week, and the next week, her room would be ready. The girl was surprised and asked how it was her room. The Duchess said she would have a private room, but would need to sleep with her mom for a while and asked if that was okay with her. Rafina waved her head and thought she didn't mind at all, because then all the attention would be hers alone. She felt so warm when the Duchess hugged her. And then suddenly Rafina remembered Mishka's words, who had said that if she called the Duchess Mama, she would be very happy. Rafina thought about those words. She didn't know if the Duchess would be happy for the girl to call her Mama. Then Mishka said that he, on the contrary, would be very happy if she finally called him by his name. But Rafina threw him on the bed, and he asked what. Wouldn't she start to her that she didn't care about him? He said that if the girl continued to behave like that, he would not talk to her anymore. But Rafina ignored his words. She was so warm in the Duchess's arms that she thought of nothing. Suddenly there was a knock at their room. Then the door opened and Adrian appeared. He asked his mother if he could play with Rafina before going to bed. The mother said of course he could. Then he came into the room, and Rafina finally saw that it was Adrian, and she thought it was Dad had already come in. Her brother said hello to the girl. Mishka, seeing her frightened face, said that she was frightened like a child. But Rafina was indignant and asked, "Can't adults be scared?" Suddenly Adrian turned to his sister and gave her something. When she saw it, she realized it was a rattle. After that, the girl took it in her hands, thanked him, and thought that newborn babies usually play with this toy. Did they all think she was only 1 year old? The twins kept asking if she wanted to play with dolls or read stories. Rafina thought it was still very hard to play with small children. Then Rafina asked how Violetta was doing. Adrian said that he had seen her off and back safely, and asked if she liked her that much. The girl replied that she did, and thought to herself that he actually liked her the best. In the story, Adrian has loved Violetta since she was a child. Rafina thought about it, the hero who left this world before she could even open her heart. But it doesn't matter at all, because she is determined to lead everyone to a happy ending. Rafina said that she is always gentle and pleasant, smells and has an affectionate voice and warm hands. The girl added that it would be great if Violetta lived with them. He actually asked if she really thought so, and suggested that he invite her to visit her tomorrow during the walk. Rafina got angry and thought she didn't mean it at all. But then I thought, Adrian is only 10 years old now, so he just doesn't understand yet. Then Rafina thought and said that in that case, let Violetta and her brother get married. The Duchess was shocked, and so was Adrian. He looked at his sister and asked her what she was talking about. Rafina thought she had hit the bullseye. She didn't realize if all lovers were so strange. But then suddenly the troupe asked her mother if she had heard that Rafina had called him brother. The Duchess replied that she had heard everything, and it was incredible. Rafina didn't understand if that was the most important thing. Adrian leaned over to her and repeated the word bro, and then added that all right, he was Adrian, her bro. The girl thought he was only hearing what he wanted to hear. But then suddenly Mishka turned to her and said it was just a failure. Rafina thought about it, and realized that it was probably going to be a little more complicated than she had anticipated. The next morning, as Rafina finished her breakfast, she thought her love operation had finally failed, and failed miserably. But undoubtedly the girl thought it was because Adrian was too young. Then she decided to go with the backup plan, namely to the seduction of Zirkin. She and Adrian have been friends since childhood, so the girl decided it would be okay to start there. When she addressed her brother, but then suddenly Lois and Luca, who were sitting next to her, became indignant and asked what it was to say, for they were the only ones who could call him brother. But the girl ignored their words and asked when Violetta would arrive already. Rafina decided it would be better to take the initiative in her own hands. And after a while, Violetta did arrive at the manor. Adrian and Rafina immediately ran out to meet her. The girl, when she saw Violetta, ran to her and hugged her. She was very happy to see her. Then Violetta asked if Rafina missed her very much. The girl answered that she did, but she was looking away. Rafina watched the wagon. She thought that, as expected, the girl had come without the mirror. Then Adrian went over to her and thanked her for her concern. But Violetta became agitated and asked if she hadn't already said that they didn't have to apologize to each other. But then Adrian suggested that they have tea together in the garden. Rafina blended into their conversation and said no, because it would be just the two of them. The girl thought that since Zirkin hadn't come, she would go by herself. Adrian, when he heard that they didn't want him in the company, was upset. But Rafina thought to herself, so he wouldn't make that face, because it was all for their happiness. Then she looked at Violetta and asked, "She and her brother are friends, aren't they?" The girl replied that of course they were best friends. As they walked the other way from the estate, Rafina asked the girl if she was friends with anyone else. Violetta said that of course she has a good friend named Zirkin, and he is the crown prince of this kingdom. Rafina asked in surprise, "Is he really the crown prince? And can she tell you more about him?" And she thought to herself, this is just the way it's going. Violetta said that Zirkin is incredibly popular. She doesn't want to admit it, but he really is very handsome. Rafina asked, "Is he really more handsome than Adrian?" Violetta said that she thought they were about on the same level and asked the girl why she was so interested in him. Rafina answered that he was her friend. The girl got embarrassed and asked if she wanted to know more about her and said that was very nice. Rafina confirmed and said that she wanted to meet all of Violetta's friends because she is very nice. Violetta hugged the girl and told her that she would definitely come tomorrow as well, and that she would bring Zirkin with her. Rafina thought that it was all a simple matter. Mishka said that the girl had amazing acting skills, but she ignored his words and told Violetta to make sure they came together, thinking that they would see Zirkin soon after all. The obsessed protagonist who turned the ending of the story into a tragedy. He must know that now Rafina will take the situation into her own hands and make everyone happy. At this time, the Duke was in his office with his assistant. His name was Hadin, and he is Duke Eston's extra secretary and butler. Hadin said they were secret documents that belonged to Viscount Beryl. They had all the information, including Madame's birth details, and asked what further orders would be given. The Duke, who read all these documents, was very angry and asked what he should do now. Hayden said that if the Duke gives the order, he'll give it to you for whether it's worth using a Black Mask squad. The Black Masks are a secret organization of the underworld that can get rid of a person without a trace elite unit under the command of Duke Eston. The Duke said that when he thinks about what those idiots did to his daughter, he can't just let it go and forget about it. When he told Hayden to start by blocking their moves. "All the members of this family who dared to treat his daughter like that are nothing but pathetic trash," said to make his assistant make them regret their own birth. Hadin said he would do anything, and thought that as long as Duke Aston had the Black Masks in his hands, it was only a matter of time before Bacon paid for his sins with his own life. When his assistant left, the Duke thought he would never forget that day. The blazing mansion, the wail of his wife, which tears the as well as soap-dead baby in her arms. Duke thought it was his fault, and he carried the burden of the mistake he had made for life. But lo and behold, after some time she appeared before the Duke again, alive and unharmed, his beloved Rafina. And to you, the memories came flooding back to him. The Duke wondered what it was, if not a miracle. The next morning, when they were all gathered together around the table, the Duke smiled and said that since everyone was already assembled, they could start breakfast. Rafina looked at her father and noticed that his eyes were watery, and he even looked a little like a carp because of it. The twins, who were sitting next to each other, began to whisper. Luca turned to his brother and told him to look at his father's face. But Lois said he had seen everything, so don't let him yell. Luca told his brother that their dad looked like a Crucian carp, but at that moment a loud laughter had already surrendered. The boys looked at Rafina, who turned on him. The girls became uncomfortable. Then Lois asked, "Is that really her?" Laughing. Rafina felt uncomfortable, but she realized she wasn't the only one who thought their dad looked like a Crucian, and covered her mouth with her hand, holding back another laugh. Bear, who was sitting on her lap, said it was rude to laugh out loud at such a thing anyway. Then Mishka told the girl to look at him. Hertz's eyes were very red, but he laughed anyway. Rafina thought she was really sorry. At that moment, Rafina poked a slice of banana on her fork and held it out to the Duke. The man was surprised and asked, was it to him that Rafina didn't realize why it was that suddenly everyone around her had gone silent? Then the Duchess said, "Dear, but nothing more." The Duke got up from the table and walked over to his daughter, sitting down on her lap. He said it looked delicious. Rafina looked at the people around her and didn't understand why they were crying. Then she saw that her mother was crying too. Mishka asked the little girl what to do now with all this atmosphere, but Rafina didn't answer anything, and when Mishka looked at her, he saw that the girl was also crying and asked her why she was suddenly crying. But the girl herself didn't know. She actually hated to cry and thought that in this house tears were always flowing all by themselves. The whole family gathered together, and they sat hugging each other and crying. The girl calmed down a little, thinking that now she too had turned into a carp. But Mishka suddenly asked, "Is she all right?" After all, today was the day, and it really was, because that was the day Violetta would finally bring Zirkin, and Rafina would have to propose to him. The girl tried to tune in, telling herself that she could do it and there was nothing wrong with it. But then suddenly a maid came into the room. It was a new maid named Selina. The girl said that Rafina's dress was ready and offered to wear it. The girl was very surprised to hear that a whole dress had been prepared for her, and after a while, Rafina had already tried it on, afterwards asking Selina how she liked it. The maid said it was really cute, and Mishka confirmed and said it was just killer cute. The girl thanked them. Rafina then walked over to her and picked up Mishka. Selina asked if she would take her favorite Mishka with her. The girl said yes, but thought he wasn't really her favorite. Rafina thought she was so kind even the maids treat her well. The horrible memories are slowly dissolving with these people. She will surely bring everything to a happy ending. Afterward, the little girl went down to breakfast. The Duke sat on her the whole time and watched her. Rafina was very embarrassed by this because he didn't even take his eyes off her while she ate. From that day on, that's the only way he's been acting. At this point, Duke took a cupcake from the table and said she took it. It was his favorite. Rafina really wished he'd stop acting like that. It wasn't the cupcake's fault, though, so she took it. The maids who were standing nearby were shocked because finally the lady has finally attached herself to the Duke and is even taking food from him. The Duchess wiped her tears of joy with her handkerchief because Rafina was always so scared of him. But in the end, she was still able to open her heart to him. She was so worried about Duke crying every day, but eventually things changed. The girl's father said everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. Rafina, hearing this, realized that from that day on, Daddy no longer seemed intimidating to her. Besides, there really is a blood connection between them. She feels a love stirring in her dark soul that she hasn't felt in a long time. The girl thought that she should definitely try and preserve that well-being and prevent that tragic end. But then suddenly the twins came to Rafina and asked her if she wanted to play hide-and-seek. Luca said let Adrian drive. His brother agreed and said it would be a lot of fun. Rafina got a little angry. Why did she have to play hide-and-seek? Did they really think she was that young? But in the end she decided it would be better to play a little and asked, "Will the leader count to 100?" The brothers said that was correct. Then Adrian warned her not to go far away because it could be dangerous. The girl said she wouldn't. It seemed to Rafina that with the advent of good food in her life, all the problems in her life were solved. However, she still continued to act like a child. But while she was running to find a place to hide, she felt some even excitement. She was afraid that she wouldn't make it in time or that she would be found. Mishka, who was sitting in her arms, suggested going the other way and lurking around the corner. Rafina agreed with him and ran there, but as soon as she ran around that corner, she saw some man. The girl was immediately frightened. She fell on the floor and screamed that it was a monster. Rafina was very frightened. But this guy suddenly said not to bother the mistress and asked that she let him introduce himself. Said he was Randall, her personal knight. He had been given orders to follow the girl during the game. Rafina was surprised, wondering from where he was following her. Then she remembered that there was a game going on, and answered the knight that she must hide. It was hide-and-seek after all. The man hesitated and said that since it was very dangerous outside, maybe she should hide in her room. The girl didn't understand what he was saying at all. Randall said that if she covered herself with a blanket, Mr. Adrian would never find her. The girl thought she was an idiot, but the knight said she could hide behind his back. Then she asked him in a serious voice if he had ever played hide-and-seek. Then she shooed him away and told him she would go alone. As the girl ran, she heard him laughing loudly. Rafina thought that he was a fool, and that hide-and-seek was just fun for him. Did he really think it was just fun? And hide-and-seek is really a war. It's just a game. And at that moment Rafina stopped. Mishka told her to look carefully ahead. When the little girl looked, she noticed black hair. Suddenly she accidentally caught herself and fell, hitting herself. And at that moment, this black-haired guy came up to her and asked if she was in one piece. The novel, The End of Eternal Flame. At this point in the end, Rafina still confronted the main reason why this world is going to fall into chaos. A man with hair as dark as mist and eyes as scarlet as blood. There was no doubt it was him. The protagonist of the novel The End of Eternal Flame, who in the future is an obsessed boy named Zirkin Ferdin, and the one she should offer her hand and heart to. When Rafina looked at him, she noticed that he was incredibly handsome. She wondered what he would be like when he grew up. Violetta was standing behind him, and when she saw the girl, she ran up to her at once. Taking her in her arms, Violetta said how did this even happen, and asked if she was okay. Rafina said she was fine and stared intently at Zirkan. Then Violetta smiled and told the girl that this was Zirkan, her and Adrian's friend. His Highness, the Crown Prince. Zirkin looked at the girl, said hello, and asked if she was Adrian's little sister. Rafina didn't know at all what to say to him now. Mishka told her to tell him quickly how much she wanted to marry him. The girl was surprised and asked if it was just like that the first time she met him. But Mishka said that the sooner the better, so that she wouldn't hesitate and would say it confidently. Then Rafina took him by the sleeve and said, "Let's get married." Everyone was shocked. Rafina continued to hold his sleeve and didn't understand why he was silent. Had she done something wrong? But then Zirkin looked at the girl with a serious look. She thought at that moment, is this really a rejection? And let go of his sleeve. Rafina decided it didn't matter. She still had 2 years before the protagonist went to the academy, and she just has to make a verbal pact with him until then. And until then, she's going to do things differently. Then suddenly Rafina spoke up and said, "Okay, still." Zirkin agreed and smiled. The girl thought she could use her unrivaled persuasion skills. Violetta looked at the little girl and said that she was so cute. Then she turned to Zirkin and said that Rafina had fallen in love with him at first sight. Violetta put the girl on the ground and said that she thought she would be the only one in her eyes, and asked her if she should start being jealous already and if she wanted to marry her. Rafina thought the girl was just her beautiful angel, but Violetta said it was a joke. But really, if it were possible, the girl would spend her whole life with her. But Violetta must belong to her brother. Rafina knows exactly who she will fall in love with. Besides, Adrian's feelings for her are too deep. Violetta had no idea that he had died all alone. Rafina decided that she absolutely had to prevent tragic endings and get a happy ending, if only for Adrian's sake. Then she started walking and said that Violetta was very good. After that, she took Zirkin's hand and said that she would marry him. But when the guy heard that, he laughed. Rafina thought he was just insanely handsome. But then the girl suddenly thought, it turns out that he does agree, and her plan has succeeded. It turns out that she had succeeded in getting it all figured out. At that moment, Adrian came up to them. When he saw his sister, he asked what she was doing here. But when he looked more closely, he saw that her hand was holding Mirror's hand. He dropped what he was holding and ran straight to her, putting her behind his back. Afterwards, Adrian apologized and said that there must have been some misunderstanding. Apparently, his younger sister had made a mistake. Rafina didn't understand what was going on. She thought maybe she had a wheel by her nose, the purest soul of the main character's assistant. The girl thought that he just couldn't have such a frightening expression on his face. And then suddenly Adrian called out to Randall. The knight walked over and picked up the girl. Rafina tried to kick out, telling him to put her on the ground. But he replied that it was too dangerous, and she figured out how Adrian found her. But then she realized it was all Randall's fault. Then suddenly Zirkin spoke up and asked Adrian if he had heard that his sister wanted to marry him. Adrian cringed and said it was just empty baby talk. She had only recently turned 6 and asked if she could believe anything a child said. Violetta, who was standing nearby, noticed that the atmosphere between them was getting heated. But she didn't understand why, because Zirkin was just joking. For the first time, she sees how keenly Adrian reacts to things. Then the girl went up to him, hugged him, and thought, did someone get angry? Adrian asked Violetta what she was doing, but the girl said that when it comes to his sister, he immediately turns ice cold and becomes very serious. Zirkin agreed and said that his facial expression even scared him. Was he really that excited? Violetta agreed with him and said that was right. Even though Rafina was young, she was still a lady. What was he thinking? Adrian got angry and told them to stop bullying him. After that, they all went back to the manor and drank tea. Zirkin explained the whole situation. The Duchess, when she heard that, she asked how it was that she wanted to get married. The Duke was out of his mind. He didn't understand how it was that their little daughter wanted to get married. Then the woman apologized to His Highness for their daughter's behavior. The woman said that the girl had just returned home and hadn't quite adapted yet. But Zirkin replied that everything was fine, and it was just a child's play, he understood. Then he said he had a small gift for Rafina and asked her if she thought the girl would accept it. And it was a beautiful necklace with blue diamonds.